The Sherbourne Valley Project is working to rewrite the future of Coventry's River Sherbourne by creating an urban living landscape in which people, nature and culture can thrive. The project is led by the Warwickshire Wildlife Trust and supported by the National Lottery, and is working with local communities to bring the river back to life after decades of being overlooked and hidden. The project will reroute it, restore it, return wildlife to it, clean it and reconnect people to this special river and the surrounding valley. There are few rivers that don't begin with an argument. Where does it start? And the Sherbourne is no different. Some agree that an unassuming pond in an unassuming field is the source. Others would look to dozens of tiny streams, brooks, runnels and rivulets that pour down the landscape. Though we can never be exactly sure, we do know the moor in Corley is its birthplace.
When you get a lot of rainfall coming down the valley, it is quite dramatic. It's a huge catchment really for that little section which is prone to flooding down in Allesley, and there's a lot of water coming through. So what we've got here is one of the types of intervention that we do in natural flood management, a leaky barrier. And essentially what it is you can see a load of logs just strapped across the brook here. What we're trying to do is not affect the brook in its normal day-to-day process. So as the water flows through the valley, we're not looking to do anything to change that on a day like today, certainly, and even when you get normal rainfall events. It's when you get a really high rainfall event that we want it to kick in. So we've deliberately built them sitting a little bit raised above the water level. That means normal flow can happen, but if we get a severe rain event up here and the water's canalling down through the valley and potentially going to flood, that's when these kick in. So this one on its own will have a small impact but not massive, but if you multiply that throughout all the different number of these interventions right across the valley, then they start to cumulatively have a bit of an effect on potentially the flooding down at the bottom of the valley. Each leaky barrier that I come across, generally speaking, it's doing its job and it's trapped a little bit of water. So I might be looking at one, I might be thinking, that's got 3-4 cubic metres of water that it's holding back, but it hasn't got down to Wallesley. And I think, well, there's 30-40 of these cumulatively. So I know that it's having an impact.
I think it's quite interesting, the interventions you take up here and the way they interact and complement with what we're doing further down the floodplain. That sort of ties into similar approaches we're taking with stage 0 restoration on the brook down there. So I think it's all the different parts of our work interacting and making up a sum greater than their part.
Another of the benefits of these systems is that they actually withhold silt. So I know that silt and sedimentation in the river has been one of the problems. These actually capture silt, and in fact further up the brook here, last week I was out digging the silt out that had been formed behind the brook, behind the barrier. So as the barrier slows the water down, the silt drops out of it and builds up behind the barrier. And a farmer can come and dig that out and just spread it back into the field. So it's returning those nutrients back into the fields where he wants them. He doesn't necessarily want them disappearing off, all this topsoil disappearing off down the river. So this pond is what we call a retention pool. So that's to retain water as it's coming down through the valley. So a lot of the time it is low. The idea is that the water level typically is quite low in this pool. We do want it to hold water, and in fact this pool has held water quite well in the last couple of springs and harboured lots of invertebrates, we've had frogs breeding in here, we've had egrets and things fishing in here, so it's obviously holding life. But the idea is that it actually sits low so that when we have a storm event in the winter time typically, but it can happen any time of year, this pool will hold a lot more water. And to enable that, we've actually got a leaky barrier at the downflow end of the pool, which then will act as a bit of a brake and force the water to back up into this retention pool, holding water. And you can see it's not a huge pool, but this could actually take quite a few cubic metres of additional capacity than what was here before, which was essentially just a straight channel. So we actually excavated this pool out to be an additional bit of capacity on the edge of this ditch. One thing I've tried to do a lot more of this year actually is get more vegetation into the landscape. So within the valley, if I've got any opportunities to get trees or hedgerow plants in, I've taken those. There aren't as many opportunities you might think. A lot of these hedgerows are quite intact, so it's a case of finding the gaps and agreeing that we can plant up the gaps. I have got an opportunity over there where there was actually hedgerows there until the 60s and they were ripped out, but the farmer was comfortable with us looking to put them back in. So that's almost two kilometres of hedgerow that we've put in over there, which is a massive boon for the wildlife around here as well as the project. And then sometimes it's just a case of finding a little corner like we've got here and getting in, you know, a couple of these little oaks. These oak trees here, quite, you know, quite small at the moment, but this is a sort of long-term investment. It's about the project having its legacy, and there's 25 of these across the area. I'm sure next winter I'll be able to lose another 25, 50 of these because I've got people, everyone seems happy to have a little oak tree here or there. And this has been compacted over years and years of extensive grazing. So one thing we've looked to do, and we've done it once on this farm, 13 hectares I think, is soil aeration. So you're actually behind a tractor, you're towing a roller which has got these sharp spines on them, and then they dig into the ground. They're about, you know, a couple of inches long, and they just create air pockets within the actual soil, and that breaks up the compacted soil, which is good for the soil, it's good for the plants and the grass growth, so the farmer gets real benefit from that. But from our point of view, it absorbs water better. So the farmer here has said, you know, he said if I told him how well it had worked, he wouldn't have believed me, but he's seen it with his own eyes. After a heavy rainfall, he said areas which used to just sit there with a film of water, they sucked it all up and they kept the water in. The interventions that we come up with are designed with the landowner. So I don't say, I'm going to do this to your farm, sign here. I say, I've got some ideas to run past you, what do you think? And often they will come back to me and go, oh, well, there's a wet bit there, we could create a pool, or, oh, I could, you know, that fencing's falling down over there, but if we moved it into the field a bit, you know, we could restore the fencing with your project's assistance, but actually you get a bit more, or we get more sort of margins, and they get improved infrastructure. And I don't know any farmers that aren't interested in wildlife on their farm. Some of them don't, you wouldn't immediately think it, but they're all interested really in having wildlife on their farm. So if it brings wildlife benefit, you know, that they're happy with that, they like that.
The river eventually leaves the moor and into the village of Olseley, where it cuts under roads and down suburban streets until it emerges on the green fields of Camden Wedge, where, over a century before, it was straightened and hidden, and the landscape changed with it.
These fields are actually for us to enjoy now, and we want to put it back to its original state, but not just for the whole community to use, and also show people what they used to be like. You know, it's a reflection of ourselves, the environment we create around us, how beautiful it is. I think this is one of the best green spaces I've ever come across.
Well, a lot of what you said really chimes in with what we're trying to achieve, especially with this particular place and the things that live here already and the improvements you can make. So saying about the historic hedgerows and being a bird watcher and a conservationist, being able to see species like yellowhammer and linnet that are nationally at risk species in Coventry is just mind-blowing really. We're looking to literally put the river back where it used to flow. So at the moment, you'll know, the river's sort of hidden behind those trees up there, and you wouldn't even know that it's there at all. And what we want to do is called a stage 0 restoration is the technical term, but it's literally just put it back in its old course. So there's a bit of a depression here, and that's what we call the paleo channel. So that's the old channel. So before 1888 at some point, which is the earliest maps you can get, the river would have flowed through there, through the wetland, into the next field and down. It'll get the weir in the far corner of the field, off the river, which means fish can swim back up and down, and invertebrates. And also it'll turn this river into a wetland again, which is what it wants to be. And we'll get lots of wetland species, so lots of new butterflies, plants, birds, and it should make it even nicer for people to explore and even richer in nature.
We love the wetland to be here because it is primarily a wetland at the moment, but we want to make it even more so.
Moving a river, it sounds like a crazy thing to try and do, doesn't it? But
civil engineering project.
Yeah, no, we've had some designs drawn up, and I think it'll involve a digger backfilling the channel, because it's a brook here. It's not a huge main river. It's not like the River Nile. It should be achievable. The other thing I think we would like to do is see what's already living in this field and maybe get a few more varieties of wildflowers and things to get more butterflies especially, but just more invertebrates and a greater range of biodiversity.
We're very excited about that project. You know, we're all looking forward to it. At least we've recorded it. We know what's here and what we can add to it and what more it will bring to us.
Yeah, that's a really important part of the process, is us all working together to work out what's here. So in 5 years, hopefully we'll come down and do it again and we'll be like, oh, there's so many more things here. It's so different. It's so much better.
Yeah.
We looked at old maps of the area, and the earliest one we can get is about 1888, and at that point this weir would have been here and the river would have been in the current course it is at the moment, and the problem is you can hear it actually. It's making a bit of a slightly pleasant trickling sound. The problem is you lose a lot of height from the river, so there's about, I'd say, as much as a metre difference between here and down there. If you're a fish or an insect or an animal that wanted to get up there, it'd be impossible. I don't think there's any way you'd manage to do that. And also it affects the way that the river carries sediments and lots of other things to do with its natural processes. I think you'll probably block it, and pretty quickly it's going to go, oh, there's a depression there, and it should stick to this channel. And then once it gets into there, it'll go a bit crazy and decide what it's going to do, and that'll probably get a bit bigger, this wet area. That's what I'm hoping anyway. It'll probably push out to halfway through the field and really generate lots of really good habitat that we can then maybe plant up with some really high quality wetland plant. We'll need to put raised walkways, so boardwalks or a small bridge. The last thing we want is people to not be able to walk through it.
And they'll be put in such a way that they're actually user friendly. You know, people of all walks can actually enjoy it. They'll be wide enough for people to take prams across if they so wish.
That's what the project's all about, is connecting people to nature.
Really looking forward to engaging with the Sherbourne Valley Project, rerouting the river. We'll get the school children out, we can get the local scouts out, and the neighbourhood. You know, because there's so many people who use it, people are willing to help.
Farmland bird species you get on here are really impressive, considering how close to a city we are. To see linnets, yellowhammers, skylarks, all of these declining species having a bit of a safe haven here because it's managed in a wildlife friendly way. I'm thinking wildest dreams. I mean, the cuckoo's already come true, so that's one off the list, but I'd be thinking otters, water voles would be really nice to see.
So hopefully in 4 years' time we'll be seeing them around there. We've already seen the cuckoo, so that's one tick on our list.
So when this gets a bit wetter, it'll get full of little fish for them, and we should get the grey heron and the egret. Yeah, that's a good shout. They're great birds. Again, ones that you didn't used to see that often when I was a kid. That bounced back because of work that other people have done that we can build on now.
The river leaves the wedge under a main road into the city, and from there weaves in and out of the shops and houses that first appeared in the 30s to accommodate the city's growing population. Once negotiated, it emerges onto Lakeview Park, an oasis of tributaries, pools, wetlands, meadows and woodlands, only a mile from the city centre.
It's quite a diverse site. It's really interesting site. It's got wet bits, it's got dry bits, it's got the river, It's got the woodland, so yeah, you get lots of nice things like kingfishers, grey wagtails just went past, which is a really good water bird that likes the river. I had raven once, sparrowhawks nest in the wood back there. So yeah, loads and loads of species of birds, and it's really good in winter as well. It's a real sort of haven for Coventry for migratory birds. This is where some work's been done before, which is a bit of a type site for the wider projects we want to do here. It shows what can happen when you take action in the river channel. And it's just simple interventions, so the pinned wood down there, which just deflects the currents, encourages it to scour the beds or wash the gravels clean. It's a very visual example of how our actions can affect ecology and wildlife, and you can immediately see it's causing a pull around and behind it because of what it's doing to the currents.
Like, it's almost as if making those has created like a bit of a rhythm that's then gone down the river and enhanced those pull riffle features.
The river is desperately trying to do this all the time, so you can put it in a narrow channel where it can't do it. If you give it the little nudge that it needs, you put a bit of wood in the channel, or you can do a thing called gravel augmentation, where you put more gravel in, which gives it the stuff it needs to do this, so it's like it wants to do this. So I find it really amazing with the sort of volunteer-led conservation that you're just giving the river a tiny nudge. You spend a morning or a day putting some pinned wood in like we did, and then 2 years later it looks like a different river. I think it's amazing. And then they've lowered the bank. So one of the issues with the Sherbourne is that it's been deepened and dredged out. It's really deep, disconnected channel. So when the water comes up, it doesn't go onto the floodplain.
I think it's really nice that it makes you want to kind of interact with the river a bit more.
But when you just open this out, as well as there's benefits for wildlife, people come down, so you get people with kids paddling in there. We look at something called wetland connectivity, and this area in particular, what you want really from an ecological point of view is the river connecting to the land on the side of the river.
Yeah.
And this part is the only bit after Cowden Wedge where the river can be seen to access the floodplain and use it. And one of the reasons for that is water storage. So obviously we've had some big floods, and this bit's actually a wildflower meadow that was planted again to hold up a bit of water.
Yeah.
And you can see it's really wet, and that water would be in the river flooding down towards people's homes, or the next bit that would then flood. One way you can look at the flood risk is that at the moment the river's very thin. So through this park, it's not very long. So it's like, imagine the river as a ribbon, and it's pulled taut along the park at the moment. And the more we do things like this, the more it bends it, the more ribbon it's taken to cover the park. So you're creating more capacity in the channel. This is where we've had a bit of a play, basically. I tried the approach and it's been really successful. It's also where we do our wildlife monitoring, so we do a thing called river fly monitoring with our volunteers. And we sort of catch what lives in the river, and based on what kind of creepy crawlies that is, river fly larvae, we can tell roughly how well it's doing and roughly how good the habitat is. So the stuff we look for in the surveys, which is why it's so important to do this sort of work, they all live in these stones, which are called a riffle. So a riffle's just a word for a bed of gravel, and they're really good for the river. They oxygenate it as the water runs over them. They oxygenate the water, and it's where all of those invertebrates live. And also, one day in the hopefully not too distant future, we might have fish like trout up here, and it's where a trout would lay its eggs, is on those stones. So they're like the foundation of a healthy river, is that riffle pool sequence. Look at the shape of the river and the features in the river, and it sort of makes an index score.
Then you grade them by the form, features in the channel, features around it, like how much floodwater they would hold.
Yeah. What plants are growing as well, species of plants and diversity.
Yeah.
And that produces an index score, and it enables us to do two really important things. So one, we can compare the Sherbourne to similar rivers, see how it's doing in the grand scheme of British rivers. And two, it basically captures a snapshot of what the Sherbourne is now. So obviously we're thinking of doing lots of stuff to improve and enhance the river. So we'll know that it's got that score and it used to be like that. And further down, it might be that the river's moved completely out of its current course and it's 2 meters there now. Or it might be that in that floodplain, when we look at the wider bit, now there's some really good water storage, there's a pool or a wetland, or there might be new trees or better variety of species of plants. So yeah, we're always looking for opportunity to create new wetland features in these spaces, work with the other projects we've got planned and make the whole thing bigger, better and more joined up. And part of the process of that is looking for opportunity. So if you see maybe a puddle that isn't drying up, and see if we can enhance that area and sort of take opportunity where we find it to make the most out of the projects we're doing and make a bigger, more joined up area for nature to use and think really strategically to make the best home for nature we can. I think it's really nice for people to be able to visit, and it adds like an extra string to the park's bows for people, like a bit more wildlife and nature and the tranquility it brings. So yeah, one of the things I did about a year ago was just walk through all the parks that the river runs through and see if there's any noticeably large puddles. And that's usually where you might end up wanting to do something.
Okay.
But yeah, often it starts with a puddle, you know.
Yeah, right.
We're looking at innovative ways to allow people to enjoy the spaces that we're working on. And one thing I'd love to see is a boardwalk trail through here, encouraging people to come and explore and telling them what they might see and telling them why it's important, and getting people locally to just really value it and be like, where do you live? Oh, I live by Lakeview. The park is amazing.
Once again, under a road, the river leaves the fields and into the old industrial areas of Coventry. Spawn end first, before diving into the city centre into the darkness of the culvert, before finally re-emerging along the old trade routes of Stoke on the south of the city, and from there onto the green monastery lands of Charterhouse.
I was sort of like imagine the flows of the river as arrows, and at the moment with what's happened to it, it's got deep banks and all of those arrows are pointing downstream that way, all in the same way. There's no diversity to it. It just shoots through, and you'll know after heavy rain, it comes up, it flashes high, it shoots through, and then if we start re-meandering it, those arrows start to crisscross over each other, they start to bend, and then that's when you start to get the river's natural processes really working. I guess the story of this stretch of river is where you'd have to start with it. So this has been modified lots of times, changed loads of time to meet the needs of humans. So it's been straightened, there were mills at the top end of the park, and what all those different phases has resulted in is a really deep, straight river. And that's not very good for wildlife. It's lacking in diversity, so it's straight, it's uniform, it's sort of more like a drainage ditch or a canal than a river. And rivers at this stage naturally would be winding and bending, and in the process of doing that, it creates lots of habitat for different types of wildlife. So at the moment you're getting a lot of one thing, which is a straight river with steep banks, and if you do things like re-meandering, it creates shallow bits, deeper bits, gravelly bits, bits with plants growing out of them, bits without plants growing out of them, and it just makes more little niches, more little places for wildlife to live. And then from another thing that we always have to bear in mind when you're working with rivers in cities is if you add a meander in, it makes the river longer, so the river can hold more water, which means it could have a positive impact on flooding further down the area, and it should be able to hold a bit more water as well, which is another reason why wetlands, ponds and sort of more natural rivers can be a real benefit to people as well. With urban river management, we basically just try and replicate what nature would have done. So usually if a tree falls into a river in a city, someone will take it out because it could cause a blockage. But if you imagine a river in the middle of nowhere just naturally managing itself, a tree would fall in and that would change the diversity of the currents and cause these features to start developing. What's really good for rivers in particular is to have a little bit with some trees and then a little bit that's more open. Call it the light shade regime. It just means you'll get that diversity in what's growing in the river. So the river channel at the moment here is a little bit devoid of life, and it kind of looks it, I think. So you'd get some macrophytes, so that's just plants growing in the channel, so sort of rushy type plants, or water crowfoot we've got further up. It'd be great to get some of that down here, which has got lovely little white flowers and just adds a bit of diversity to the space. I think it'll make it a bit more approachable and a bit nicer looking and more inviting to walk down as well, with a bit more of an open space really. If you open up the canopy, so do sort of take out or lower the height of a few of the trees, and you'll get more wildflowers growing on the ground, obviously get the view of the viaduct. Once we've got everyone agreed on what we want to do, it should be a fairly easy to do thing. Pollard some of the trees down and just open the area out a bit. And that's all going to feed into some of the work that we've been doing with Historic Coventry and the volunteers, just sort of over that way, in opening up the Heritage Park and again making it a bit more attractive to local people and also improve it for wildlife where we can. I'd personally really like to see, and I think would be great for local people, is you can kind of, when we've done it together, haven't you, Les?
Yeah.
You can kind of push your way right down past Whitley Village to Whitley. But I'd love to have a bit more of a formal path and an easier way to go down, so people want to have that experience and that sort of adventure going down the river and seeing where it gets to.
Yeah.
But at the moment, you have to be quite sort of determined and adventurous to do it, don't you?
It is quite an adventure at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think that's part of what the project needs to achieve, is connecting people to the river. First thing I noticed when I first came to this site was sort of see one now, there's a bulrush in the middle of there,
Yeah.
and obviously working with rivers and wetland, you see a bulrush and you go, oh, that's wet, maybe I could make it a little bit wetter and a little bit more attractive to wetland species.
There used to be loads of bulrushes in there.
It's not massively diverse, is it? So you get a lot of willow herb and sort of common wetland weeds.
But
On my first walk over, the thing I thought was, yeah, let's get a bit more water in there, let's get the bit more diversity in the species in there, and let's see if we can make it more of a feature.
But in a month or two, you'll find all of this is full of buttercups.
Yeah, the sort of rough grass.
And they'll come up, a foot high or more, But that is certainly very boggy. The further down there you get.
I think it's one of those things when you look at like this area as a whole, it's obviously already relatively wild, and like say with seasonal wildflowers here, wetland wildflowers there, and it's about sort of giving it that push and making people want to interact with it. So I think what we're hoping to do and sort of achieve is getting a pond there where that wet area is, improving the amounts of wildflowers, and then getting a path around the back with a bench and a pond dipping platform. So, because we've got a primary school just over there, secondary school just over there, and we want young people and families coming down to their local green space and just having some fun with wildlife and nature, really. So at the moment, the river through here is quite wide and quite uniform. It's really straight, and that is totally unnatural. It's not what the river wants to do. So by adding in a berm, which is like a scalloped edge to the river, usually you put posts in, fill the area behind the posts with brash, so sticks and wood off trees, and then you just wire in the top to keep it in place. And then once that's been created, it'll fill with silt and mud as it floods. They create really good homes for nesting birds and foraging areas for aquatic insects. But yeah, once they're in place, they push the currents around, pinch the width of the channel, and encourage the river to start acting more naturally, so potentially eroding the opposite bank. You get a more diverse flow regime, so it'll start to form natural river features like gravel riffles and pool systems. So when we do the berms, we'd be looking to do something called a gravel recharge, where you basically just shovel a few tons of gravel every so often down the river in, and that does two really, really useful things. So primarily, it oxygenates the water, so the action of the water cascading over those pebbles and river stones adds oxygen into the water and helps the quality of the water. But also, it's where a lot of the animals that use the river live. So lots of invertebrates, mayfly larvae and things like that, love living on the riffles. And the other thing is, we'd aspire to have some more fish in this section of river, and fish like trout like to lay their eggs in those gravel riffles, so that's creating potential spawning grounds for fish that hopefully will make their way here when the river gets a bit healthier. Associated with those riffles, you'll get a pool afterwards usually, so it's called a riffle pool sequence. And again, you get it's like adding that diversity into the river, so you get the shallow bit that maybe the heron might fish in, the insects might live in, then following that a deeper pool, so fish will be able to use that as refuge from the heron. I guess my distant dream would be to have lots of happy trout laying their eggs at Charterhouse, and you could come down and see the trout redds, the little nests they make, and you start to see things feeding on those trout, lots of mayflies, lots of birds around the edges. I think like in an urban setting that's really important, because this could go from it's a nice bit of green space to an amazing bit of nature reserve almost, and people could come down, young people, old people, and start to build that connection to nature and really sort of care about it and want to fight for it as well, which is one of the really important things that we need to do.